On August 21st, 2025, the sky over Gaborone seemed to hold its breath. In front of the government building, hundreds of journalists pressed together, cameras flashing relentlessly. No one had expected news from such a small nation to shake the entire world. President Duma, Gideon Boo, stepped up to the wooden podium, the Botswana flag fluttering behind him. His voice rang with certainty. "We have signed a $12 billion investment deal with Qatar's Al Mansour Holdings. This is a historic step." For a moment, silence gripped the crowd before it erupted. The number, $12 billion, sounded like something reserved for global powers, and yet it now belonged to a nation with a GDP of only about 20 billion, an investment worth more than half the economy, a sum powerful enough to alter the nation's destiny overnight. It was a thunderclap in clear skies. Botswana, long celebrated for its stability, cautious governance, and the so-called diamond miracle, had suddenly leapt into unknown territory, and with that leap came burning questions. Why would such a careful country choose such a daring move? Why Qatar, a Gulf state thousands of miles away? And most of all, is this a golden opportunity or a golden trap? In that moment, the eyes of the world turned toward Gaborone, a small nation, a massive deal, and a story that promised not just to reshape Botswana's future, but to ripple across the entire African continent. To understand why Botswana dared to gamble half of its economy on a deal with Qatar, we have to go back to the 1960s, when the first diamonds were discovered beneath the dry earth of southern Africa. Diamonds transformed Botswana from one of the poorest countries in the world into a rare African success story. Paved roads, modern schools, new hospitals, all of it was built from the glittering wealth beneath the soil. For decades, the diamond miracle became not just an economic foundation, but part of the nation's identity. But any country that pins its future on a single resource eventually learns the cost. Nearly 80% of Botswana's export earnings come from diamonds. When the global jewelry market thrives, Botswana prospers. But when demand collapses, the entire economy shakes. The crisis of 2024 proved this brutally. Inflation and economic uncertainty forced global consumers to cut luxury spending. Diamond traders shut down operations. Mines reduced production. Government revenues plunged. For the first time in decades, Botswana faced a contraction, not because of corruption or conflict, but because of overdependence on one fragile resource. It was then that a painful question emerged. Can Botswana really live on diamonds forever? President Duma Boo knew the answer was no. If the nation did not change course, the diamond miracle would soon turn into a diamond curse. And so he began searching for an escape route, a new path that could push Botswana into an era of diversification and resilience. For decades, Botswana's financial lifeline was tied to the West. Its diamonds flowed to European markets, international banks provided credit, and institutions like the IMF and World Bank loomed over nearly every fiscal decision. But the price of that money was always the same: endless strings attached, spending cuts, austerity programs, structural reforms, prescriptions that often left deep social scars. Qatar, by contrast, emerged as a very different proposition. Flushed with petrodollars from oil and gas, its sovereign wealth funds and private holding companies have been aggressively searching for opportunities abroad. And Africa, with its young population, vast resources, and untapped markets, has become fertile ground. What makes Qatar stand out is how it approaches deals. Instead of loans tied to political reforms, Qatar offers investment partnerships framed as mutual benefit. Africa provides opportunity and resources. Qatar provides capital, technology, and global reach. For Botswana, the appeal was obvious. No political lectures, no austerity conditions, just billions in investment arriving precisely at the moment the country needed them most. The timing of the deal was equally deliberate. Just days before, in Addis Ababa, African leaders had gathered for the 38th session of the African Union. The central theme: sovereignty, industrialization, and the urgent need to escape old dependencies. When President Boo unveiled the $12 billion agreement with Qatar immediately after that summit, the message was unmistakable. This was not only about stabilizing Botswana's economy, it was about declaring independence from Western dictates and signaling that in a multipolar world, Botswana would shape its own destiny. For decades, diamonds have been the beating heart of Botswana's economy. They lifted the country out of poverty, built schools and hospitals, and turned it into one of Africa's rare success stories. But when everything rests on a single resource, the risk is unavoidable. If the global diamond market falters, the entire economy shakes. The downturn of 2024 proved this harsh reality. As global demand for luxury goods collapsed, mines slowed production and government revenues plummeted. For the first time in decades, Botswana faced economic contraction, not because of corruption or conflict, but simply because of overdependence on one commodity. This is why President Boo's government sees the deal with Qatar not just as financial relief, but as a blueprint for a new economy. An economy unchained from diamonds, more diverse, more resilient, and better able to withstand global shocks. Agriculture stands out in the investment package. Projects in irrigation, mechanization, and agronomy research aim to transform Botswana from a food importer into a self-sufficient producer, and eventually, an exporter. This isn't only about economics, it's also about food security, a weakness for many African states. Tourism, too, will be elevated with luxury eco-lodges and cultural experiences woven into the country's offerings. Botswana is already home to the Okavango Delta, a natural wonder, but its infrastructure has struggled to attract large-scale international tourism. With Qatari capital, Botswana hopes to compete with established destinations like South Africa or Kenya. Perhaps the most transformative element lies in diamond value addition. Instead of exporting rough stones and letting foreign companies capture the profits, Botswana will build local cutting and polishing centers. This means more profits retained at home, more skilled jobs created, and a chance to reposition itself not just as a diamond mine, but as a jewelry hub. In short, the $12 billion deal carries the promise of a new Botswana, an economy no longer defined only by the sparkle of diamonds, but by diversity, creativity, and long-term vision. A $12 billion agreement is never just about economics. It always carries layers of political and strategic calculation. The big question analysts are asking is, why Qatar and why Botswana at this exact moment? For decades, Botswana's economy was tied closely to the West. Diamonds flowed to Europe, and institutions like the IMF and World Bank often shaped its fiscal policy. But Western capital rarely came without strings attached, demands for austerity, structural reforms, and strict oversight. Even a well-governed nation like Botswana could not escape the shadow of dependency. Qatar arrived with a different image. Backed by vast hydrocarbon wealth, Doha doesn't tie its money to political lectures or democracy lessons like the West. Instead, it presents itself as a partner seeking mutual benefit. Fewer conditions, more opportunities. For Botswana, this represents autonomy, the ability to negotiate on its own terms in today's multipolar world. From Qatar's perspective, the choice also makes perfect sense. North and East Africa have long been magnets for Gulf investment. But Southern Africa is different, less saturated, rich in resources, politically stable, and strategically positioned within SADC, one of Africa's largest regional economic blocs. By planting itself in Botswana, Qatar doesn't just secure diamonds, it gains a gateway into the entire southern half of the continent. Perhaps most striking is the security dimension. By allowing Qatar into its defense and cybersecurity sectors, Botswana isn't just accepting investment, it's inviting a foreign partner into the heart of its sovereignty. This has sparked debate. Is Botswana strengthening itself or inadvertently opening the door to external influence? Yet many analysts argue the opposite. In an era where Africa is breaking away from Western dominance, leveraging the rivalry among global powers is not weakness. It is strategy. It signals the rise of a new Africa, one that negotiates, chooses its partners, and positions itself at the center of the global stage rather than the periphery. An equally important question is, why did Qatar choose Botswana, a small country of just over 2 million people, instead of Africa's larger economies? The answer lies in Doha's long-term strategy. Over the past decade, Qatar has sought to diversify its investments beyond the Middle East, reducing its dependence on oil and gas. It is looking for destinations that are politically stable, resource-rich, and strategically positioned. Botswana ticks all three boxes. First, resources. Diamonds remain central, but they are not the only attraction. Botswana has reserves of coal, copper, nickel, and enormous potential for solar energy. By investing early, Qatar secures a foothold in industries that could boom in the future. Second, image and reputation. Qatar wants to prove to the world that it is more than just a small oil state. It seeks to position itself as a global financial hub and a smart investor capable of finding gems in unexpected places. Partnering with Botswana, a country famous for good governance and low corruption, enhances Qatar's credibility, in stark contrast to some of its more controversial investments elsewhere. Third, strategic location. Botswana is part of SADC, a regional bloc with over 300 million people. This is one of the most attractive emerging markets, and Qatar can use Botswana as a launchpad to expand influence across southern Africa. Fourth, long-term security. By entering projects in defense and cybersecurity, Qatar is not only investing money, but also anchoring Botswana within its strategic orbit. This is a form of soft power investment, hard to measure but invaluable for building durable political alliances. In other words, Botswana may see the $12 billion deal as a lifeline to reshape its economy, but for Qatar, it is a global move, a play for profit, prestige, and geopolitical influence. Any agreement as massive as $12 billion carries both enormous opportunities and significant risks. For Botswana, the initial excitement could easily overshadow the real challenges lying ahead. First, the risk of new dependency. Botswana once relied too heavily on diamonds and suffered greatly when the market collapsed. If not managed carefully, the country could fall into another cycle of dependence, not this time on a single resource, but on a single strategic partner. Second, transparency and governance. While Botswana has long been praised as one of Africa's least corrupt nations, a $12 billion cash flow is big enough to test the system. Secondary contracts, infrastructure projects, and defense cooperation could all become fertile ground for hidden interests and elite capture. Third, political and social pressure. When a small country receives such massive capital inflows, one pressing question arises: how will the benefits be distributed? Will they reach rural communities and ordinary workers, or concentrate in urban centers and among elites? Unequal distribution could deepen inequality and trigger social backlash. Fourth, volatile geopolitics. Qatar is not a neutral player. Its investments often serve to build long-term influence. This could pull Botswana into the rivalries of Gulf powers, or even into larger global competitions between the US, China, and Russia. Finally, the risk of overpromised, underdelivered. While $12 billion has been announced as a commitment, Africa's history is filled with mega projects that never fully materialized. Delays, shifting terms, or sudden withdrawals could leave Botswana with unfinished projects and public disillusionment. In short, this deal is a double-edged sword. It could launch Botswana into a new era of prosperity, or it could become a trap that undermines the very economic and political independence the country has safeguarded for decades. Botswana's $12 billion deal did more than shock the world. It sent a powerful message across the African continent. It proved that even a small nation, if it chooses the right moment and negotiates with confidence, can command the attention of global powers. For decades, Africa has often been seen through the lens of dependence, whether on diamonds, oil, or foreign aid. But Botswana stepped away from that narrative. The country dared to ask, Can an economy truly stand strong if it leans on a single resource? Their answer was this historic agreement. What is most striking is not just the $12 billion figure, but how Botswana framed the deal as a statement of sovereignty and a vision for Africa's future. At a time when leaders across the continent were debating how to break free from Western dominance, Botswana arrived with perfect timing, signing a deal that echoed the very themes of independence and self-definition. This story also serves as a reminder that the true strength of a nation does not lie solely in its resources, but in its courage to transform them into a foundation for broader growth in agriculture, technology, and security. Botswana chose the harder path, but one that promises greater resilience. It is a path that other African countries may soon have to reconsider for themselves. Ultimately, the deal makes it clear that Africa's future will not be dictated by pity or charity from the outside world. It will be built on bold decisions and the ability to leverage a multipolar world to claim equal footing. Botswana has written the opening chapter, and the rest of Africa will decide how the story continues. When the media frenzy dies down and the delegations return home, one question remains. What will Botswana do with these $12 billion? A contract, no matter how large, is only the beginning. What truly matters is how a nation uses such an enormous sum to change the daily lives of its people. Mismanagement could turn the $12 billion into unfinished projects, mounting debts and disappointment. But with vision and discipline, it could become the turning point that transforms Botswana from a diamond-dependent economy into a diversified hub for the entire region. Economists predict that if the agricultural projects succeed, Botswana could not only feed its population but also become a breadbasket for southern Africa. If tourism is invested in wisely, it could move beyond safaris and evolve into a world-class luxury experience. And if technology and cybersecurity advance, Botswana could emerge as one of the rare African examples where security and prosperity walk hand in hand. Yet the greatest challenge lies not in technology or capital, but in people. How will the country train a new generation to seize these opportunities? How will it fight corruption, the disease that has crippled many other resource-rich nations? And how will it ensure that the benefits of this deal are not hoarded by a privileged few, but spread to every community, every family? Botswana now stands at a crossroads. One path leads to a new kind of dependency, with hidden obligations and unforeseen risks. The other leads to rebirth, a nation confident, resilient, and ready to stand alongside Africa's strongest economies. The choice now is theirs to make. The story of Botswana does not end within its borders. It echoes across the continent, where many nations face the same pressing questions: how to escape dependence on a single resource, how to negotiate fairly with global powers, and how to turn investment into lasting transformation. For decades, Botswana has often been seen as an exception in Africa, a small, peaceful nation that managed its diamond wealth more wisely than most. But with this $12 billion deal, Botswana has sent a far larger message. Even small states can negotiate as equals with global powers, so long as they know how to leverage their stability and strategic position. If Botswana succeeds, it will stand as living proof for the entire continent, proof that Africa is no longer a beggar, but a partner with a voice, with choices. Botswana's success could spark a new wave of confidence from Nairobi to Dakar, from Addis Ababa to Bamako, that Africa can indeed rewrite the rules of the 21st century. Of course, risks remain. A massive contract cannot replace good governance. But Botswana has ignited a much bigger debate, that the era of blind dependence on the West is ending. A new age has begun, one where Africa can rise and choose its own path. And it is at this point that Botswana's story becomes a model. Not because it has already reached the destination, but because it dared to take the first step down a path no one had walked before.